Okay. Evening, everybody. Hope everybody's okay. Um, Been a long day for me. I spent the morning up on Capitol Hill. There was a national emergency clergy mobilization for Minnesota, and over on the Senate side of the hill, and the goal was to get um, the Senate not to pass the ICE and DHS funding without major changes and restrictions on ICE and Border Patrol functioning. And you know, I don't want to fall victim to the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy, but it looks like at, at least for the moment we won. So that was, but there were about over 400 clergy from all over the country. A lot of people came in from Minnesota, and it was very inspiring. I mean, I was sorry that I could not be in Minneapolis the weekend before. So if I can't go to Minneapolis, then Minneapolis comes to me. But it was an inspiring day. All right, so I'm going to share the screen. Um, huh. All right. Um, Move the window. All right, so we were in the middle of Mishnah 4, and just briefly, this is all quotes from Ben Zoma. So we began, who is wise, the one who learns from every person, um, and then it's actually kind of a misreading of what the text actually says, which actually says, I have become wiser than all of my teachers. But
Rabbi, I've thought about that, and I wasn't going to mention it, but
go
since you
ahead.
brought it back up, I think that I can see why they translated as they did, because by the work that his teacher provided, he has exceeded them. Your your translation's also correct, and that is he's become wiser than his teachers because he took their body of knowledge and extended it.
Sure, sure. I mean, right, they're not actually in contradiction. And by the way, this is not, you know, I mean, I often rail against what I perceive as mistranslations. Okay, but this isn't a mistranslation. This is an accurate translation of the way Ben Zoma reads the verse. But Ben Zoma is actually misreading it. But misreading it in a I think a more humble way, right? Um, but anyway, so but I do think that this is actually like better advice because we should try and learn, from everybody we encounter. And then who is um, who is mighty, the one who conquers their evil inclination or who conquers their passion. And then I think I pointed out that there's a commentary on Pirkei Avot called Avot de Rabbi Natan, which says that the mighty person is the one who can convert an enemy into a friend, which is, I think, even a more difficult task. Okay, so we're, as I said, we're in the middle of this Mishnah. So I mean, I think you can see my cursor. So the finger is pointing to where we pick up again in the Hebrew. Ezehu ashir hasameach bechelko. Who is rich? The one who rejoices in his lot. And then there's another quote from a different verse of Psalms. You shall enjoy the fruit of your labors. You shall be happy and you shall prosper. Okay. Now, this phrase "sameach bechelko," which Dr. Kolb translates as rejoices. It's not like it's not a wrong translation, right? I mean, we're certainly familiar. I mean, the word, right, sameach, um, simcha, right? Right, so that is happy, but I have generally understood or heard this Mishnah to me, not that you rejoice in your lot, but you're satisfied with your lot, right? In other words, that's the key, right? That is not, it's not to have, desire for more and more and more, right? Because we, yeah, Leslie, go ahead.
It could be interpreted that this is it almost seems like it's is this a command from God, because it says you shall.
No, it's advice. It's, it's ethical teaching. It's not um a command, because even the Psalms, even the verse on the Psalms that this is a gloss of, I mean, Psalms is not a legal text, right? I mean, and even if you could interpret a particular psalm as like, commanding somebody to do something, it's not authoritative, right? I mean, we don't derive law from, I mean, in theory, we don't derive law from any texts that aren't, part of the Torah. So you wouldn't derive law from the Psalms, even if the psalmist was like commanding, his children or whatever,
So
right?
it
But
doesn't say that in the Torah anywhere, or the
no,
okay.
no, not that I'm aware of. But look, we all know people who have a lot of stuff and are miserable, right? And people who have very little stuff and are happy, right? And I mean, there's, I mean, literature, and not just Jewish literature. I mean, world literature is full of all of these stories, about a person who says, well, when I have this or that or the other material thing, right? I mean, you know, a pony or a boat or a big house or, a Tesla Cybertruck or whatever, right? And I'm not happy, but once I have this thing, I'll be happy, right? And then they get the thing, and it's like, is that all there is, right? I mean, Rabbi Howard Kushner wrote a book, right? When all you've ever wanted isn't enough, right? Because look, there's no generation of humanity that has had more stuff than our generation, right? I mean, and even with the growing gap between the wealthy and everybody else, right? I mean, the average family in the United States that is considered poor, has a standard of living that previous generations would have considered just unbelievable. Um, but we're not necessarily any happier, right? I mean, and without like turning this into like confessional time, you know, think of your own life. I mean, do you become happier you know, when you get more stuff? I, no, I mean, certain things, yeah, right. I mean, like travel can certainly because it broadens your horizons and it you encounter things that you wouldn't otherwise. But just having more stuff, and it's one of the things that frankly puzzles me how these mega wealthy individuals, right, just cut every corner to amass more wealth, right? And like, how much is enough? How much do you need? And it doesn't seem to make people happy, right? So the key to happiness, according to Ben Zoma, isn't more stuff. It's learning to be happy, to be satisfied with what you have, right? I mean, I would imagine that Ben Zoma would agree that the necessary precondition for that is that you should be like you know, at a subsistence plus level, right? I mean, it's hard to be happy when you're starving, hard to be happy when you are homeless, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's assuming that you've achieved sort of that basic level of subsistence, then I think happiness comes from internal and from being of service to other people. It doesn't come from just having more stuff. Um, I'll stop here. Questions, comments, thoughts?
Well, I think the reference to the world to come is interesting. So that not only will you be happy currently while you're alive, but also presumably in heaven, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, we hadn't actually gotten to that
Oh,
part of it, yes, yet, but right, but yes.
true.
I mean, so right, I mean, we certainly learned about parallelism in poetry, right? Um, but yes, I mean the so the first, right? So it's this is a Psalms verse, not a and it says, "You shall be happy in this world," right? Right. If you enjoy the fruit of your labors, you shall be happy and you shall prosper, happy in this world and prosper in the world to come. Okay. Which is not something, I mean, I think that that's not something that the psalmist would have anticipated, right? I don't think that at the level of the Psalms, the idea of a world to come, like it certainly in a discrete, like where you have your own individual existence and consciousness and so on and so forth. I don't think that existed um, at the level of the Psalms, right? But that's what we do, right? We take a text and we read it in accordance with our current beliefs and our current situation, and not just in its original context. And I think, I mean, I could go on and on about this part, but that is where um, conservative Judaism, in particular, and academic Jewish studies um, has gone wrong in sort of saying that like the original meaning, the original linguistic meaning, the original historic, that's the meaning, and that's not the way texts work. You know, I mean, and that's true. I mean, that's true in halakha, but it's true in in secular law as well, right? I mean, that is certainly, you certainly have a school of thought that believes themselves to be originalists, but they're not. I mean, you can't, it's a question of how you interpret, but there's no such thing as as an uninterpreted text. Um, that's how texts continue to live, right? But I think, I mean, why? So here's the question, right? Why would it be important for Ben Zoma to say something like that, right? You shall be happy in this world, and you shall prosper in the world to come.
Well, perhaps it addressed human psychology that that we think there is a world to come, and so
Yeah, but why do we think there's a world to come? I mean, I think, and this is when I say I think, I mean this is not a thought that's original with me, right? But many historians of religion say that the whole idea of a world to come arose because of the manifest contradiction between what the Bible seems to promise and the way the world seems to actually be, right? I mean, right, if you look at certainly almost anywhere in Deuteronomy, right? It's that, right? If you do good, you'll be rewarded, right? Right? If you, right, behave and you'll get candy, misbehave and you'll get spanked, right? That's the basic theology of of most of the Torah, right? And then we look around, right, and we see, right, Sadiq Viralo Rasha Vitovlo, right? A righteous person, and everything is bad for him, right? And a wicked person, and everything is good for him. And then, arises this idea of the afterlife and says, yeah, sure, now, but just wait, right? And just wait. All of you good people who are suffering, unlimited buffet, and you're not even going to gain weight, right? And 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 all of you wicked people who are enjoying marble gold-plated bathrooms, watch out what's going to happen to you, right? And that's where it arrives, right? So I mean, I can't speak for Ben Zoma, but it occurs to me that might have been what was going on in his mind as well, right? Okay, I'm happy with this very modest standard of living, but it'd be nice if I had something more. All right, so you'll have pie in the sky when you die, right? Um, it, I don't know. I may be feeling particularly cynical today, but that's the way I read Benzo. It doesn't mean I'm right. Yeah, Leslie.
Wasn't there someone in the Bible, and I'm surprised it wasn't Moses, but someone in the Bible that God took to heaven? He he wasn't dead, but God still took him to heaven, right? You know what I mean?
Elijah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so that the fact that that happened, or well, or they say that happened, doesn't that also indicate there must be something on the other side? Because he didn't die. Where did he go? I mean, he went somewhere.
Right. Okay, fair enough. But of course, Elijah is like, several hundred years after Moses, right?
What's your point?
So the point being that, all right, I maintain that the idea of an afterlife with reward and punishment did not exist at the time that the Torah came into being. It's later. I mean, it's certainly in later books of the Bible, right? It's not in the Torah. In other words, what I'm
You
saying,
don't think there always was an afterlife, but it wasn't mentioned till later, or what? I'm not sure what you're saying.
all right, all right. I think you have to differentiate between what actually exists, which we don't know. Right? I mean, do you know if an afterlife of reward and punishment exists or not? You don't. Nobody does. Right? So bracket the question of what actually exists, right? I'm talking about what beliefs existed. Okay, and I am saying that the belief in an afterlife with reward and punishment did not exist during Moses's lifetime, but may well have existed during Elijah's lifetime. But Elijah was several hundred years later than Moses, right? I mean, the time, just to give you a sense of the scale, okay? So the time from Moses to Rabbi Akiva is roughly the same as the time from Rabbi Akiva to us. Okay, I mean, it was a long period of time. Okay, and the fact that most of us don't know this, it's not your fault. It's the fault of people like me, right? Like, we haven't done a good enough job teaching the history, right? So that people are, way back then, as if it's just like one undifferentiated mass of time, when it was actually several hundred years. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, but are you saying this because I said I don't know why it wasn't Moses? Because the only reason I said that was because he was so, beloved by God. He was so
Right.
special. I'm just saying it's amazing that it didn't happen to him that way. That was the only point I was making.
Right. Yeah, no, I get it, but I'm saying that that idea didn't exist at the time of Moses. Now, I mean, it doesn't mean, look, it doesn't, there are midrashim about Moses having similar experiences. Okay. I mean, I mentioned Moses and Rabbi Akiva. Okay. Um, if you look at the Torah scroll, right, the Torah scroll, there's they're called tagim, and I think in English they call them crown. There's these little decorative things on the top of certain letters in the Torah, right? And so, according to this midrash, Moses is writing down the Torah, right? and he asked God, what are all these little crowns for? And God says, oh, centuries from now, there's going to be this person named Rabbi Akiva, and he's going to derive mountains and mountains and mountains of halacha from those little crowns, right? Which, of course, is just, that's hyperbolic, right? But Moses says, oh, I want to see him. Okay, so God shoots Moses several hundred years into the future, and he goes into Rabbi Akiva's classroom and he sits down in the back, and Akiva is explaining all this stuff to his students, and Moses can't follow the class, right? And he starts to get really, really upset until Rabbi Akiva says something, and one of the students says, "Oh, how do you know that?" And Rabbi Akiva says, "It was a law given to Moses at Mount Sinai." Right? And then, Moses is satisfied, right? Because, to me, and so as a conservative rabbi, right, how do I read this story, right? That on the one hand, Judaism and halakha develop, right? That it's not static, right? And the Judaism of Rabbi Akiva is not the same as the Judaism of Moses, which is why Moses couldn't follow the class. But on the other hand, even if it's not identical, there's still continuity, right? And so when Akiva says, well, this was the law given to Moses at Sinai, that was enough for Moses to understand, an Orthodox rabbi would read that story differently, I suppose. Not being and never having been an Orthodox rabbi, I can't, tell you exactly how they would read it. But, like I said, as a conservative rabbi, to me, that teaches an awareness of development, but also an assertion, which I think is a factual assertion, that there's still continuity, right? Something doesn't have to be identical to be, nevertheless, like continuous. All right. Yeah, Sue.
Sorry. For all the years that the Jews lived in Egypt, they had a very strong belief, I think, in the afterlife. Um, I don't know if they felt as far as being rewarded or punished in the afterlife, but there
Right.
was, religions all over the world that were that old, like even Mesopotamia, I think, had a belief in an afterlife.
Right. And no, and I think they did. There is this concept of Sheol, right? Which is in the Torah, right? Because Korach and his followers go down to Sheol alive, right? The earth opens up and swallows them, and they go down to Sheol. So there was the concept of an afterlife. It just was not developed, right? In terms of, like, as I say, reward and punishment and what happens there and so on and so forth. It existed, but it was kind of like a gray, shadowy thing. I'm not saying that's why, when I clarified it, is that, an afterlife of reward and punishment. And that's the thing. I don't know enough about, I read about the Book of the Dead, and I know, embalming and why stuff was buried with people in their tomb. But I don't know that there was a concept of reward and punishment in the Egyptian afterlife. When I say I don't know, I literally mean I don't know. Um, uh, all right, let's go on. Okay. Ezehu mechubad hamechabed et habriot, who is honor the one who honors his fellow human beings? Shene'emar ki mechabdai achabed uvozai yekalu. All right. I honor those that honor me, but those who spurn me shall be dishonored. Right? So we gain honor by honoring other people, right? And similarly, we gain, the B part of that verse is that we are dishonored when we dishonor other people. Um, I mean, I think it's actually a profound. It's actually a profound statement. I mean, I at this clergy gathering that I went to today, I ran into Casey Caseman, which some of you certainly know him. And we were talking, and I mean, I knew that I didn't know he's 86 years old, and he's fully energetic. Is just a lot of energy. His mental faculties 100% intact. I mean, he has the energy of a much younger person. And he said, it's doing stuff like this that keeps me young. And he's very, very, very involved in social action and social justice. And I do think that by honoring the divine in other people, it brings honor to you. And by dishonoring the divine in other people, it brings dishonor to you. And in that sense, we reap what we sow, I think. And you could connect it, I think, to the previous teaching, right? That you are rich if you're satisfied with your lot, right? As again, reap what you sow. You're rich if you're satisfied with what you have, and you're honored if you honor others, and you are dishonored if you dishonor others. And I think the more I think about it, and the more I look at the world around us, they're very profound teachings. And if everybody lived by those teachings, we'd have a much better world, I think. So I don't know. Any thoughts or questions on that part?
Just one last comment.
Yeah, I didn't even know you were here because your camera's off.
Sorry, because
Oh,
while
that's
I'm
okay.
walking, so
Okay.
I look funny. And it's -17 here, so which is something like 5 degrees by you. So there's a story. I'm not sure when or where, but basically this person came to his rabbi and said to him, I was told in Tractate of Avot that if I run away from honor, it will pursue me. And
Yeah.
so why isn't it? And the rabbi answered, because you're always looking back to find out if
Yeah.
it's right behind you.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
much
I'm familiar.
like
I'm
what you just
familiar with
said.
that.
So
Is that a Hasidic teaching or just a folk
something like
teaching?
that, yeah. So
Yeah.
but that's exactly what you were just teaching. It's just we should just know that if we do it honestly, any of those teachings, it's sure to to be there, but if not, then it's not. So anyway.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Rabbi. All right. Let's. All right. So Mishnah 2. Okay. Ben Azai Omer. Ben Azai said, "Have ratz lemitzvah kala kivachamora uvareach min ha'avera." Okay, so Ben Azai says, literally be running. In other words, be, as the translation here, be quick in performing a minor commandment as a major commandment, and flee or run away from transgression. Okay, so I mean, the only issue that I have with this statement of Ben Azai is, all right, so when it says you should, be as eager or as zealous or whatever to perform a minor mitzvah as a major mitzvah, I mean, what's a minor mitzvah and what's a major mitzvah? Right? I mean, we all have, I think we all have our sense, maybe, of what is a minor and what is a major mitzvah, right? Because look, all of us, and I'm when I say all of us, I mean all of us who are in this class right now, we all perform mitzvot, right? I mean, you're performing a mitzvah right now of, right, limud Torah, of studying Torah, right? So all of us perform mitzvot, and at the same time, all of us are, selective. We pick and choose, right? I mean, my college friends would say, cafeteria Catholics, right? I mean, we go down there. I'll have some of that, and I'll have a double dose of that, double portion. Up, don't need that, right? We all choose, right? And what is the basis upon which we choose which mitzvot that we observe, which mitzvot that we don't observe, which mitzvot that we, let's say, observe partially? Um, you know, I just think that's an open question. Again, I mean, I certainly don't want to put anybody on the spot, and I don't want to turn this into like confessional time. But but how do you choose which mitzvot you observe more fully, which mitzvot you observe less fully, and which mitzvot not at all? Right. And obviously, that's not like a knowledge question. That's a sort of, internal question about your own sort of process. Yeah, Leslie.
Well, this reminds me of the question I asked you when we had another class about, I said something about picking and choosing. Is it better to, is it better to do everything or nothing, or is it better to do some things? And you were explaining how something about the sparks, if the sparks from God or something like that.
Right.
Well, so doesn't that sort of apply here?
Look, I mean, I think in a formal sense it does, right? I mean, there in the sense that
Explain to people what the sparks were, because I don't think everybody was here.
Okay, so all right. So this is Kabbalah, right? This is specifically Lurianic Kabbalah, right? That the world was essentially created by a big bang, okay? And sparks of divinity are encased in matter, okay? And when a Jew performs a mitzvah, sparks are released and reunite with the divine source. Okay. And at a certain point, enough of those sparks will be released that the Messiah will come. All right. And that explains, that's the whole reason why Chabad is, trying always, well, just put on tefillin, just light Shabbat candles, right? Because maybe this Jew who's never put on tefillin before, putting on tefillin will be the mitzvah that liberates the spark that tips the scale, right? Maybe this woman who's never lit Shabbos candles ever in her life, light Shabbos candles tomorrow night, liberates the spark that tips the scale, right? I mean, there's a certain beauty and profundity to that, actually. And but even on the, like, here, I think there is a continuity between the earliest biblical level and now. That is to say that I'm not aware of any place in the Torah where it gives a mitzvah and says, but this mitzvah isn't all that important, right? Or gives a mitzvah and says, now this one is really, really, really important, right? I mean, there is no, like, really formal statement of a particular mitzvah being more important or less important than any other, right? But we all have our own sense of what's important and what's not important, right? And in that sense, I said no two Jews are alike, right? I mean, I know Jews who go to shul every Shabbat or almost every Shabbat, and kashrut is not even remotely on their radar screen, right? And I know other Jews who have, a fairly high level of kashrut. Prayer, Shabbat, what's that, right? And and there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. There really doesn't, right? Why one Jew will decide, keeping kosher is important, but observing Shabbat is not important, right? Or going to shul is very important, and then as soon as shul is over, I'll get into my car and go shopping and stop at McDonald's on the way for a bacon cheeseburger, right? I mean, and we all know people like this, right? I mean, so how do we decide, like, yeah, this particular thing, this is important, but this other thing is not important. And I have no idea. And if you asked me, what is the basis? I don't know that I make decisions myself. I I don't know what the basis is, frankly, right? But it is a perception. It is a perception that certain mitzvot are more important and certain mitzvot are less important. But it is entirely personal and entirely subjective, I think. Because if it wasn't personal and subjective, right, we wouldn't have such radically different types of observance. And I was going to say levels, but it's not even levels, right? Because it's not like, again, like just take Shabbat and Kashrut, right? Which there's nothing anywhere that says, well, one is more important than the other, right? But there are certain people for whom one is very important and the other not at all, and then other people like precisely reversed.
Well,
Yeah.
okay, can it be something to the effect that separately we might not observe all the commandments, but together we do, because some people do this one and some people do that one?
For sure, for sure, right? For sure. I mean, I'm sure that if you take the collectivity of the Jewish people, every mitzvah is being observed by at least one person, right? And that is to say, every mitzvah that is possible to observe. I mean, there's a vast number of mitzvot that either pertain directly to the temple or don't necessarily pertain directly to the temple, but can only be observed while the temple stands, right? So nobody's observing those, right? But bracketing those mitzvot that can't be observed, yeah, right. I mean, somebody's observing. Nobody's observing everything, but everything is being observed by somebody. Um, but that's not, again, that idea of division of labor, which I think is very clever, but it's also like that's not found anywhere in the Bible or the subsequent, you know, law codes. I just, think, but what's interesting to me is that as much as I'm not aware of any sort of guideline by which you are supposed to decide what mitzvot are major and what mitzvot are minor. I mean, in the Talmud, it says when dealing with the law of conversion, right? It says if somebody comes to you and they want to convert, you teach them some major mitzvot and some minor mitzvot, right? So, like, certainly as far back as the Talmud, right? Well, then of course, Pirkei Avot is part of the Talmud. The idea that there are major and minor mitzvot, it exists. I mean, having said that, I mean, if you ask, like, within the Orthodox community, right? Like what qualifies you to be considered a member in good standing of the Orthodox community? And there are three, all right: Shabbat, Kashrut, and Taharat HaMishpacha, which translates as family purity. But that means, you know, um, the wife goes to the mikveh and the husband refrains from contact with her, until she has, right? Those are like the three mitzvot that, if you observe those, you are eligible to be a member in good standing of the Orthodox community. And if you don't observe those, or let's say, or sort of like either acknowledge that you don't observe them or are publicly observed, not, publicly seen not to observe them, then you would forfeit your place in that community.
Did the sages in the
Yeah.
Talmud debate what was minor versus major?
No, they asserted that minor and major mitzvot existed, but I'm not, and again, I don't know the whole Talmud, far from it. Okay, Rabbi Goldman certainly knows more than I do, but I am not aware of any place where they said, either by consensus that this is a major and this is a minor, or even had a debate about whether something was major or minor.
No, they never did. And
Yeah,
what I was going to actually say about those three that you mentioned was that most of them actually aren't public. The only one that's sort of public is if somebody sees you, riding a donkey on Shabbat. That's public. But otherwise, those three are pretty personal, and it's nobody's business. So
right. Although, kosher, somebody sees you walking into a non-kosher restaurant or whatever.
but that wasn't the thing back then.
Yeah, that's true.
Most restaurants were for Roman and Greek customers. There's actually a story in the Talmud about a restaurant that was doubly kosher and non-kosher, oops.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right. So, well, thank you for confirming that. That's helpful. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So, and flee from transgression, right? Shem mitzvah goreret mitzvah, va'avera goreret avera. Okay. A mitzvah leads to another mitzvah, and a transgression leads to another transgression. And that second part of transgression leading to another transgression is certainly so. I mean, right? Like you commit a sin, and then as a result of that, you commit another one, right? Like you don't want to get caught, right? And again, this is like general literature, it is full of this, right? Like somebody embezzled some money from their company because they have a gambling habit, right? So the gambling habit causes them to be an embezzler, right? And then they embezzled that money and then they lost it, right? So now what are they going to do, right? So they're going to either embezzle more money on the theory that, I'm certainly this time I'm going to win, right? Or they rob a bank so that they can pay the company back the money that they and not get caught, right? It is, and similarly, I think, because we just finished reading the parshiot where it says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, right? Which I think is morally a problem, right? If God hardened Pharaoh's heart, then why does Pharaoh get punished, right? God is the one who did it, right? But if you look, right, the first 5 plagues, it says Pharaoh hardened his heart. And it's only the second 5 plagues where it says God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And I think you can read that like psychologically. Like you get caught like you're doing something wrong, right? And you know you're doing something wrong. And you say to yourself, I don't want to do it, but you do it anyway because you feel that it's like out of your control, right? It's out of your control, and I think you can tie that to this idea that Avera goreret Avera, right? That one transgression leads to another, right? That Pharaoh had established this pattern, and having established it, he felt powerless to break it. So in his own mind, he's like, God is making me do this. It's not that God was making him do that, but he felt it was out of his control because the pattern had been established, right? And once you develop a pattern of behavior, it becomes very, very hard to break out of that often, and that's the whole basis, of a lot of psychology and 12-step programs and so on and so forth. So I think, you know, that the statement that Avera goreret Avera, that, one transgression leads to another, I think is actually very, very true, or at least, potentially so. Um, and then it says, Sheschar mitzvah mitzvah, uschar avera avera. The reward of a mitzvah is another mitzvah, and the reward of a transgression or a sin is another transgression. Right? That in other words, I think what it means, I think what it means is that, right, that we we establish these patterns, and then these patterns become very, very hard to break, right? But also, like, in terms of what we were talking a while back about the afterlife and reward and punishment, right? So if you would ask Ben Azai, well, if I perform this mitzvah, what do I get from it? Another mitzvah, right? And if I do this sin, what happens? Another sin. It's internal to itself. It's not external. Right? Thoughts, questions, comments on what? Yeah, Leslie.
One time I asked Rabbi Raphael, if you're eating something that you shouldn't be eating, something non-kosher,
Right.
should you still say a prayer? And he said yes. So, but it's a very strange feeling to do that, because you feel like you're doing something wrong, and so you kind of don't want to say a prayer over it. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
But he said,
it seems to me that the psychology of that would be that at a certain point, instead of saying, well, I shouldn't say a prayer before eating this thing, you would say, I'm not going to eat this thing.
No, I say, and please forgive me for eating this thing. Because I don't know. Well, anyway. So it's kind of a strange thing, though, that he said to do that, because I almost would rather not say a prayer because it seems like it's a kind of an insult to God to do that. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you. I hear you. I definitely do. But I do think that look, I mean, on a sort of purely like technical legal, right? You are still gaining nourishment from it, right? Even if it's trafe, you're gaining nourishment from it, right? And it comes from God, right? So I think that you can construct a rationale that says yes, you should still say a prayer before it. Okay, but I think the psychology would be, I think, that maybe to push you towards that point where you're going to ponder the contradiction and say, I shouldn't eat this. Okay, like there's um I know I've spoken in sermons, at least once or twice, about this book by the late Rabbi Richard Israel called The Kosher Pig. Okay, and I don't want to take the time to say why it's called The Kosher Pig, right? But the chapter called The Kosher Pig is about questions that he was asked as a rabbi that have no good halachic answer, because like the framework of the question is so remote from halacha that you can't really answer it within the system, but then he would try to answer it anyway. Okay, so the one question that he got, because it's relevant to the point that you raised, and then we'll finish with this, is that, all right, so this person says, I have been invited to dinner at a friend's, and she does her own baking, and she's very, very, very proud of her baking. And I know that she uses lard in her pie crust. Okay. And I don't want to insult her by not eating the pie. So even though the pie has lard, I'm going to eat the pie anyway. But can I put cream in my coffee along with the lard pie? Because after all, lard is meat, right? And meat and milk and so on and so forth. So can I put cream in my coffee? And all right, the technical halachic answer is yes. Okay, because the prohibition of meat and milk only applies to kosher species. All right, not doesn't have to necessarily be kosher slaughter, but kosher species, right? So pork and milk, it's no worse than pork and not milk, right? Which, by the way, so on a purely like halachic level, ham and cheese is less sinful than a cheeseburger. Okay, because you're not allowed to eat ham, but there's no prohibition of eating cheese with your ham. That's not like an additional sin, right? Whereas there is it's a sin to eat trafe beef, and it's another sin to have cheese on the trafe beef, right? Because the prohibition of meat and milk applies to trafe beef it doesn't apply to pork. Right. But Rabbi Israel said, but that's not the answer I gave them. The answer I gave them is no, you should not have cream in your coffee along with the lard pie, because if you are in the system sufficiently to ask that question, you are in the system sufficiently to be confronted with what the system actually says and what you are doing, which you yourself actually believe to be wrong based on the question that you just asked me. Right. And it's all about psychology, right? I mean, he admits that, like, he was asked the question as if it's a halakhic question, but he gave really basically a non-halakhic answer, right? Because most of if you are a non-orthodox rabbi, or even if you're an orthodox rabbi, but your congregants are not all strictly orthodox, right? It's as much to do with psychology and like cultivating behaviors as it is like just a purely legal answer. All right. So thank you for that question. All right. Good night. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
Stay warm. And if you, it's still nasty.
It's going to be very cold on Saturday.
I know. Lori and I discussed it, and we're going to go ahead, like, realizing that we may well not